Guys, welcome. Remo Stanley here from Scattrick Property Group. I am fortunate enough to be sitting here with a very good friend of mine, Andrew Morello. Andrew is the winner of Australia's Apprentice, the first Australian Apprentice, and also the head of business development at the Entourage here in Sydney. And mate, thank you for inviting me into your beautiful home.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming along, mate.
I'm going to apologise up front. We are sitting with Sydney background. We're on Vaucluse at Andrew's house, so we do have a bit of air traffic and
background noise. We're backing onto the ocean, overlooking the harbour down in beautiful Vaucluse. The sun's shining, the birds are chirping. It's a great day to catch up with a friend and talk real estate and all things property.
Beautiful, mate. Thank you so much for your time today, mate.
Thanks for having me.
Look, I guess first off, the biggest challenge that I'm finding at the moment, and a lot of our clients, a lot of the platforms that I'm on, the biggest challenge that we're finding at the moment is everybody's holding on to cash. No one's investing.
Yep.
Everybody's scared about what the future holds. Do you have any words of advice? What are you currently doing in today's current market? What's your strategy?
Great question. So I think, and I'm very, very lucky. For those who don't know my background, I've been a property investor since I was 18 years old, and also my family's been in property in some way, shape or form since they came off the boats from Italy in 1956, and my brother's one of the directors of Jellis Craig down in Melbourne, Jellis Craig Real Estate. That's Jellis Craig, if anyone wants to check it out. They do sort of boutique, medium, top end to medium class residential majority. They do have a development department and they do have a commercial department, but that's what they focus on. So obviously my experience has come from working in real estate transactions for the last 15 years now, and working across a myriad and plethora of property categories, and effectively being involved in it would be over 1,000 transactions now. So obviously I was old enough, I'm 34 now, but I was old enough to remember my dad during the 91-92 recession we needed to have, which was, Paul Keating's era, Paul Keating, Bob Hawke era, and then I saw my father go through that. Then I got into business during the dot-com bust in 2000, so I dealt with the property market off the back of that. And then I actually was transacting real estate on a daily basis during the GFC. So obviously I was around during that market too. So this is very, in my opinion, what we're going through right now is what I call a paper recession. So what that means is that on paper, we've had 2 negative quarters. That's what it means. But the whole argument and the whole challenge that we've got with Australian property right now is it's a sentiment play. And that's the challenge, that it's not really a fact. Like, the reality is there's a lack of supply, so people are still buying. The reality is that money's still cheap and banks are still lending. Have things gotten a little bit tighter? They got tighter before COVID happened. So like, the reality is that John McGrath, who's very well known in the property industry across Australia as well and internationally, he's one of my mentors, and he always tells me, Morello, control the controllables.
Right.
Control the controllables. Like, the reality is that you can sit there and you can be negative about what's happening globally, but the reality is there's still opportunities in the market. So like right now we're speaking to vendors, we're speaking to buyers, we're speaking to borrowers, we're speaking to investors, and the reality is that they're all saying the same thing. There's still opportunities in the market. You've just got to be prepared to go out there and get them, number one. And number two, more is lost with indecision than wrong decision. Like, the reality is, if you can get yourself into a great opportunity right now, you should be taking advantage of that opportunity. Like, it's Australian property. A study came out this morning on the way back here to come and do the interview with you about Sydney property. So anyone can go check this and they can Google it. I'm sure it's come out on today. What's today's date? The June...
Good question.
Yeah, let's say it's June 12th, I think, June 12th, something like that. So if you Google, an article, a study that was done on behalf of the federal and state government for New South Wales, by the year 2041, Sydney's going to need another 1.6 million residences.
Right.
That's Sydney market. Now, you look at the whole East Coast, I think it's still going, extremely strong. The West Coast and Adelaide, they just plod along, they do their thing. And then I think the reality is, and where the opportunity is buying the right category of property, which we can talk about a little bit more later on.
Yeah. So actually that brings me on to my next question is, so obviously you've been involved in commercial, residential, what would be what would be your strategy? Would you do a bit of both? Would you focus more on residential? Would you focus more on commercial in today's market?
So the challenge you've got with commercial and industrial, not challenge, but something you need to be vigilant of, is once you go into commercial and industrial property, then you are in the business of real estate. It's no longer you're a mum and dad and you're buying an investment property or a second investment property or a third or a fourth or a fifth. Like, once you've sort of started down the commercial industrial path, you are in the business of real estate. And what that means is that you need to run your P&Ls like you're running a business, profit and loss statements. You should be catching up with your accountant quarterly, so like, obviously my family and myself have come from industrial factory and commercial petrol stations. So now I grew up in petrol stations, BP service stations. If anyone's old enough, my father was in Amico service stations. You wouldn't even remember Amico, we're too young. And my dad had Caltexes as well. So, I've grown up in commercial real estate, and there is so much benefit to commercial real estate in the sense that there's far less onus on the landlord and the vendor. But the challenge you've got is that you need to be in a financial position, one, to put down a larger deposit. So right now, most commercial lending, you need to be putting down anywhere between, 10, 15, up to sort of 30% in some cases for the banks to give you the rest. Plus, you need to come up with stamp duty, and if there's no ongoing concern, you also need to come up with the GST. So you need to have a good pot of money to play with. The second thing is that I would be, if you're getting into it for the first time, very cautious about how secure the tenant is right now. Like, COVID's a whole new world. Like, I'm sure there's been a bunch of tenants, like, look at Flight Centre as a retailer, right? Like, Flight Centre had a great, a great valuation. It had a great, had a massive retail distribution, and then all of a sudden, Flight Centre now are shutting down 150 shops. So imagine you're one of the owners of one of those retail shops. You'd be like, well, how's that happened? How did I lose one of the biggest retailers and one of the strongest businesses in Australia? And it was because it was unpredicted. So the reality is, those owners of those properties need to do two things now. They need to go, okay, I've got what I like to call the cash floor. So I've got the cash floor in order to keep the tenant. And by the way, if you are already in commercial or industrial property, do whatever you can to keep the tenant, whether it's discount the rent, because they've got a better chance of getting back on their feet than you finding another tenant that's going to be able to,
of course,
to get back in there. So I think commercial and industrial have such great opportunities. You need to have a good cash flow and be able to wear the buffer in case you've got periods of time where your properties are empty as well. When it comes to residential, I'm a big fan of residential. I've made a lot of money over the years on residential. You came to my waterfront apartment at Bondi.
That was right.
And I probably cleared $1 million in 7 years in that. Capital gains free because it was my principal place of residence. So, like, there's very, very rare opportunities where you can clear $1 million in 5 to 7 years tax free in Australia. So it's a really good class to live in. And like my neighbour here, bought a place for 4 million plus, knocked it down, and he spent 3 to 4 million building. So the reality is that it's so sorry about the noise of the construction site next door, but we thought we couldn't outdo this view. But the reality is that residential, like, he's doing that. Yeah, he's overcapitalised. I've told him to his face, so I'm not speaking behind his back. He's overcapitalised. But 10 years from now, Australia, and especially, the metropolitan cities, is still extremely undervalued. Like, I'm a big believer in Melbourne. I don't know how many of your viewers or listeners are looking in Melbourne. I love Melbourne. I think Melbourne's still massively undervalued. Yes, I was born there and I grew up there. Yes, I own quite a bit of real estate there. But the reality is that you could go, 7 to 14 kilometres from the city, and for $500,000 buy a freestanding house to line a large block that is potentially subdividable, or you could put a unit on the back. So, like, they're very, very rare in the new home space that stretch between Melbourne CBD, inner west, let's say that Yarraville, Seddon, inner west area, all the way up to Geelong, which Geelong's become the Parramatta of Melbourne. That whole stretch is being developed. I think there's phenomenal opportunity along that stretch. And you can still get into Melbourne for 500, 600, for 700, you get the perfect property. And a lot of the time, if you are going new build, there are some great opportunities where you can align with a good operator that allows you to find a tenant pre-settlement.
Right.
Yeah.
So Andrew, talk to me a little bit about Yellow Brick Road, how you built Yellow Brick Road. Obviously, you've built it out to
135 stores. Yeah.
Yeah. So, talk to me a little bit about lending practices as well,
Yep.
and so forth. A lot of our viewers would like to understand the lending practices about how they're able to go out and
Yep.
find financing and stuff like that for properties as well. So,
Yeah, fantastic. So I was very, very lucky to have been working with Mark Boris for the last 10 years with the Yellow Brick Road business. We developed it out to 135 properties, 135 locations nationally. And we worked with a lot of accountants, financial planners, mortgage brokers, and people in sort of, that we even get mums and dads getting into the industry as well. So it was a really good cross-reference from people that have been in the industry for multi-generations now, and they wanted to join a brand to be a part of a community as well, and also people that were starting out. So the good part about doing that is I got to see a cross-reference of clientele as well. So there was everything from the mum and dad investor to the sophisticated investor to then the financial planner or accountant who's had experience in the money world and understood how it worked, but understands that lending policy is something that will always change. And the more you can educate yourself about, and even just as either a professional in the industry or even as a mum and dad investor, the more you can immerse yourself. And that's one of the concepts I have in my book that we can talk about a little bit later, is that there is a whole chapter on immersing yourself in property investment. Going to property seminars, going to property events, reading property books, setting yourself up on a thing called Google Alerts. Like in all the areas that I own properties in, I'm set up for Google Alerts, so I know if there's any development going on. I know right now in this land banking development site that I've got in Moonee Ponds down in Melbourne, that the Moonee Valley Racecourse around the corner they went for 8,000 residences. They're going to end up building 4,500 residences. So it's going to turn that Moonee Ponds into a mini city, 7.2 kilometres from the CBD. But it's important that I know that, so that way I can go, okay, have I justified spending that little bit extra on a potential development site that I'm getting 2.9% yield for in my rental returns, which is terrible.
Yeah.
But I'm going to get the capital growth. It cost me 1.83 million to buy it, but I know that in 10 years time, my worst case scenario is it's worth 4 million. My middle case scenario is I can develop the site, and my best bet, like develop the site with townhouses or I think townhouses, I know in New South Wales some people call them something else, or knock down the whole thing and build a tower. So like when you can start to see what else is happening in the area, and once you understand how what we call socioeconomic indexes work, and understand how lending practices are done, a lot of people, when they see me speak at property events, the big question is, should I go regional versus residential, and versus metropolitan? I say, well, it's you've got to really work that, reverse engineer it of what's happening in the market at the time, where the opportunities are. So obviously I did quite a bit of work around understanding lending practices and lending policy, and understanding the RBA meets on the first Tuesday of every month. If you don't, the Reserve Bank of Australia, if you're not somebody who, right now you can go on the website, on the Reserve Bank of Australia website, and you can just download a little one-pager. There's a one-pager version, then there's like a 50-page version, and like, they use these 10 metrics, it's kind of weird, but they use these 10 metrics around, what is consumer spending doing? What is, how much milk got sold? How much, everyday, necessities are being sold. So that's how they determine whether or not they should increase or decrease interest rates. Now we've slipped into an official recession. A lot of people that I speak to, even educated people, don't even understand this, Remo, where they go, which is fine, because I'm not classically educated. I'm self-educated, right? So I don't have a degree in economics, but I understand how the Reserve Bank have their 10 categories and how they make a decision based on interest rates. Now, according to the mandate of the Reserve Bank by the government, because it's supposed to be independent from the government, they need to make decisions based on what they call historical data only. So what that means is they're not allowed to reduce interest rates going, shit, we're in COVID-19, we know we're going to hit a on-paper recession, we need to reduce interest rates in order to stop that from happening. They're actually not allowed to do that, because a lot of people will say to me, well, why wouldn't they do that to stop us going into a recession? We needed to go into a paper recession.
Yeah.
Like, there's not people lining up for food stamps, and I know there are people struggling in Australia, but we're not.
Yeah.
It's, Australia is the land of milk and honey. It's our biggest positive is also our biggest detriment, that we are an island nation. We are insulated from a lot of what's happening in America. We are insulated from a lot of what's happening in Europe and Asia. We often get the benefit very quickly, and often when things go wrong, we get the lag opportunity still as well. So Australia is the land of milk and honey, and that insulation allows us to have that sustainability. And I think, in my opinion, we'll see an interest rate cut now that we're officially in a recession, which, for those of you who don't know, a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So, the word sounds worse than it actually is, but it's like we've had a couple of, quarters of negative growth. So was the rest of the world, by the way.
Yeah.
We're recovering a lot quicker. They announced 2 days ago that restrictions for economies, for business are going to be brought forward. The restriction, the stage 3 restrictions that we're going to release in late July, they're going to do it at the end of June now. So, Australia is recovering very quickly. We've got a great country, whether you like the government or not. They're doing a great job through this. They're stimulating the economy, and I'm very, very excited about the things that are going to be happening.
Beautiful, mate. What do you anticipate the bounce back's going to be in terms of property in Australia? Are we going to see, I look at a lot of the media, and I don't believe a lot of what goes on in the media.
Yep.
For various reasons.
This media is good, those guys, so make sure you keep watching this media.
There's obviously a lot of the media is saying that the property market's going to crash by 10 to 20%. I'm not seeing that at the moment, though.
No. First of all, there's a lack of stock. So you got to separate it into what I call existing stock versus new build, right? So, like, in the existing stock market, there is it's probably come off, in my opinion, 5 to 7%, and that's across most metropolitan cities. But the reality is there isn't a lot of stock on the market, so that could be a bit of a placebo effect, where it's keeping the prices, reasonably strong, considering that nobody can, there isn't a lot of stock. So there's always people who are going to need to live somewhere. They're either going to buy, they're going to rent, or whatever. They're going to need to live somewhere, right? So what I try and explain to people is that there's always going to be an economy for property, which is fantastic. The levers that will determine the ups and downs of real estate, and in the long term, as long as you hold on to real estate, you should make money. The levers are going to be determined by access to liquidity, so access to cash, which there still is, right? And there's still going to be. What we're going to see, I reckon, is probably some of the majors easing off on their lending, but then you're going to have these second and third tier lenders that have been dying and begging to get into the Australian market, that are funded by Asian or European banks trying to get into the Australian market, and it's going to be encouraged by government because they're going to want competition in order to keep the banks honest after the Royal Commission. So that's certainly going to be an opportunity. Where I think we're going to see a couple of strugglings, and I apologise if anyone's just recently bought an apartment, is that the challenge you've got is that the valuations might struggle a little bit on the apartments. So do I think apartments long term will do well? Yeah, I do. But so you're going to need to ride it out and get through it. Do I think you're still going to be able to get tenants? Yes, I do. People are going to need to live somewhere, right? But where the challenge is going to be is these valuers are going to be a little bit tied up. So unless it's bought at an auction, if something's bought at an auction, the valuer will take the auction contract as gospel. So if you are a buyer, try and buy on auction day. So if you are a buyer and you're buying an apartment, try and buy it on auction day. If you are buying off the plan, just be a smart buyer. Speak to the developer, speak to the intermediary, and make sure you negotiate the best opportunity for yourself.
So you mentioned before that you reckon they're going to cut the interest rates again. What's the lowest they can cut it to?
They can cut it to 0%, mate. They did it in America.
Will they?
No, they're not going to. No. The Australian economy's not that bad. So I reckon we'll see at least 0.25% off between now and the end of the year. And then it's going to be a matter of the banks trying to pass that on. I reckon they'll pass it on if people start paying again. So, if you're a property owner in Australia, you should have negotiated with your banks ASAP as soon as COVID happened, which I did. you know. So I got in touch with my lenders. I've got, you know, quite a number of mortgages across a number of lenders. I do that on purpose so that, you know, that way I've got some leverage against them. Because if you put all your eggs in one basket, it's very, very. I don't think the banks are at risk. Like our 4 Australian banks, but you know, 2 of my loans are with Macquarie Bank. And they had less wriggle room, but they did offer me you know, obviously they compound your interest component, and they amortise it over your 20-year loan or 25-year loan, whatever you've got. But at least they gave us a bit of a reprieve so we could concentrate on our business, get that back on track, pass on any savings to our tenants where we could, and, you know, touch wood, but I've had a good run with my tenants. Had to, you know, help them out a little bit, but, you know, all reasonable. So, you know, so that's where you got to look at your profile. So, you know, I buy properties in metropolitan Australia, you know, and generally East Coast. I'm not saying that's the only place you should be looking, but East Coast, because, you know, I really haven't had a bad experience in I'm 34 now. Bought my first one at 18, so what's that, you know, 16 years being a property owner in Australia. I haven't had a bad experience. So, like, I always try and explain to people, like, I go on historical data as well, not predictive data all the time, but then I then try and sit with as many knowledgeable people as possible, like yourself, and experts like accountants and financial planners and real estate experts in those local markets to get as much information as possible, so then I can make better decisions.
So Andrew, I had a chat with some of my clients this week, and a number of them asked me, should I be going variable or should I be going fixed rate in our current time, especially now knowing that there's a possible interest rate cut coming up soon. So what's your strategy? What would you recommend?
Yep, so it's always an ongoing question, and we don't have the crystal ball, because even if the Reserve Bank does give us a 0.25% interest rate cut before now on December 31, which is, in my opinion, most likely going to happen at a minimum, by the way. The reality is we actually are not going to be able to, we're not going to know if the banks are going to pass it on. So what you'll know now, and this is where it's important about building your A team. So building, you know, that accountant, that financial planner. In my opinion, mortgage broker, obviously, if you've got a great relationship with a banking lender, yes, but the challenge you've got is, even with, you know, I've done, you know, coaching and business advisory work with the 4 major banks, and they're great. You know, we're very, very lucky in Australia to have 4 major banks that are AAA rated. You know, they've been very, very smart. They've withstood the test of time. They've seen recessions. They've seen economic downturns. They've got big enough profits, and they're backed by the Australian government. So we're very, very lucky to see that, you know, as to be in an economy where that exists. Where the challenge is that you've got they're only limited to their products. Yeah. So, you know, like the reality is you need to know what else is in the market right now. Now, you know, I talked about before that the RBA can only, which is the Reserve Bank of Australia, can only make decisions on what we call historical data. Now, banks don't need to do that. They can make a decision based on what we call predictive data. So they've got things like actuaries. You know, my cousin Marcello Negro is one of them. They've got, you know, economists. They've got a whole team in the background at the bank working out in advance, okay, I know that, you know, the Reserve Bank's probably going to reduce interest rates between now and December. So what they'll do is they might get ahead of the bell curve and try and create a sexy enough product in order to get you to go from, you know, NAB over to CommBank, or to go from your second tier lender to, you know, ANZ sort of thing. So a lot of the fixed rate offerings right now are very, very sexy. I'll use the word, you know. So, you know, my mortgage broker and financial planner Daniel Carini, he reached out to me and said we should look at fixing a portion. Like, he goes, there is some really good opportunities, 1 year fixed, 2 year fixed, 3 year, up to 5 year fixed rates that are now at the point where they're, and in some cases, what I call neutrally geared against the yield, or that is the rent, for those of you who are getting into property investments, so the rent or the yield of the property. Does it mean that my properties are positively geared or neutrally geared? No, because there's unforeseen expenses, like I was saying before the remo that I've changed 3 hot water services in the last 6 months. When I rang my plumber, Hayden, he actually thought I was joking with him. He's like, one of the girls rang him from that manages my properties, and he goes, I just had Kayla ring me. She reckons that you need a new hot water service at 273 Escobar Road. I'm like, I do. He's like, that's impossible. We just changed it. I said, no, that was 279. So the reality is, as a property investor, you are in the business of property, and those are those unforeseen expenses that you really can't determine what's going to happen until it happens, right?
Yeah.
So, but if I took what I'm getting from a rent point of view as income, and I compared that to what are my monthly repayments, for that mortgage, on a 60, 70, 80% LVR, they generally neutrally geared these days, which is fantastic. Now, the next question is, do you fix the whole lot, or do you fix a portion, or do I fix none and wait for an interest rate drop, right?
Correct.
Now, I'm a big believer, and this is my opinion, and also, my financial advisor, Daniel Carini, who was Mark Boris's right-hand man for the last 17 years, 18 plus years, went and built Wizard Home Loans over in India with him, built Wizard Home Loans Australia with him, followed him into the Yellow Brick Road business. So these are highly intelligent, educated people and experienced people, because I always pride myself on being, especially in my sphere, the dumbest guy in the room, because I surround myself with so many geniuses. And you can do that at a micro level. Like, you can start doing that by surrounding yourself with great accountants, great financial planners, great mortgage brokers, great people that have been in the property industry for a good period of time. So I have portioned my fixed rate. So on one of my properties that is a potential development site, I've portioned 50% fixed, 50% not, and I've just done it for a year on year, and so I'll review it every year. And for another one of my properties, I've done it for 3 years, because I know that I'm not going to be selling it anytime soon. The risks, or the SWOT analysis, so for those of you who don't know a SWOT analysis, SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. The SWOT analysis on fixed rates is that the strength is you get a lower interest rate. The weakness is that you can't sell or change your product. You are fixed to that product for a period of time. So we saw coming out of the GFC, some people took advantage of some really good fixed rates, and they fixed their whole product and property in for 3 to 5 years. And we saw this massive growth period during that period after the GFC 2009 up to sort of 2014, 14, and people were like, shit, I thought I was getting a good deal. I locked in this great interest rate for 5 years or 3 years, and then they were like, I couldn't sell my property, and if you do change your product, you do need to pay break costs. So that is a threat. Where the opportunity, so that's the strength and the weakness, where the opportunity is if you do it portioned, like 50%, at least if you do come into what I call a windfall, which that means you might be picking up money through either inheritance or a business sale or a property sale from another property, you can throw some money into what you call your variable portion. These are sorts of little tips and tricks that the average Australian doesn't know about, and they've probably lost in I'm not being hubris or arrogant. The reality is that right now, you need to start thinking about your future. You need to start thinking about, your retirement strategy. And the scary part is that most Australians aren't getting the right advice, and it scares me, because the ones who actually need the right advice are the mums and dads. It's not the wealthy. Like, the wealthy can go and pick. Like, I'm not uber wealthy, but I'm in a position where I can go and catch up with Jerry Harvey, who's worth $2 billion, and he can give me his opinion on the economy right now. I'm in the position where I can catch up with, John McGrath, who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars and has real estate companies all around Australia, and I can pick his brain. I'm in the position where I can take Mark Boris for lunch, and he will invite 2 or 3 chief economists, and we'll sit there over a steak and have that conversation. But the average mum and dad does not have that information, and it scares me, because it could be the difference between 100, 200, up to $500,000 in making some basic decisions very early on in the piece as a mum or dad with children about their retirement strategy. So make sure you don't only just get the right advice, but also do your own research, and take what I'm saying today and go, wow, that Morello guy, he seemed to have known a lot about what he does, but I pride myself on knowing a lot about a little and a little about a lot, which means at any point I know enough to get me by to make a good decision, but at the same time it always makes me curious enough to go out there and get the best information and make the best decision.
Right. So, Matt, I'm glad you mentioned strategy. Most people that I speak to think buying 1 or 2 investment properties is a strategy. To me, that's part of a plan, part of a bigger picture, part of a strategy. It's not really a strategy. What's your strategy?
Yeah, great question, and you're right. It needs to be part of an overarching strategy. So there's probably 2 or 3 things that people watching this, whether you're watching it from a professional point of view or a personal point of view, you should be looking to do. First of all, is a little bit of a practice around what is your vision, mission, and values. So like understanding what's important to you, what kind of a lifestyle you want to live. Like I don't buy expensive things. I don't own a car at all. I know that's difficult if you do have children. I don't have children. I want them one day, but like, to me, my values are around, I want the freedom to be able to travel. My values are around giving back to my philanthropic arms, which I've got 2 orphanages in Cambodia through Project Gen Z, if anyone wants to check that out and support it. Also sit on the board for Seed Foundation. I did the Kokoda Trail last year. So I like being in the financial position where we work with Indigenous kids, the financial position to be able to give back to my philanthropic arms. But at the same time, if I want to go and travel and I want to go and watch the Monaco Grand Prix, I can. If I want to go and take my family away on a trip. I've got 6 goddaughters. If I want to take my goddaughters out for a day at Chatston Shopping Centre or Bondi Junction, I can do that, right? So the reality is you've got to work out, first of all, what is your vision, mission, and values. The second part of your strategy needs to be, what is my 12-month and my 3-year, what we call North Star. So what am I aiming towards in the short to medium term? And then last but not least is, what is my retirement strategy, which should be part of a much bigger conversation around what is your risk profile and what is important to you. I mentioned to Remo earlier off camera that, and he's seen me speak on stage a number of times over the years, and one of the biggest things for me is knowing Morello's 30-second answer at 3 a.m. That if someone came to your home at 3 o'clock in the morning and put a gun to your head and said, why you? Do you actually know the reason why you're busting your ass? Do you know the reason why you're self-employed? Do you know the reason why you've had that corporate job for the last 20 years? Do you know the reason why you're a mum with 2 kids, but you've decided to go back to work so you can prepare for your future? You need to know your why you, because you're not doing it for the money. You're doing it for what the money's going to do for you later on. So my Morello's 30-second answer at 3 a.m. is that Andrew Morello wants to make lots and lots of money, to pay other people really, really well, to do the things he doesn't want to do, so he can do more things he loves doing with the people that he loves. And so I take that as one of my core values and my mission statement, and then I reverse engineer it and trickle it down into my values and go, okay, what strategies do I need to employ? What sacrifices do I need to make in order to be in a financial position that come the time when maybe I have children, that I have the flexibility and freedom to drop them off and pick them up from school, that I have the flexibility and freedom to go missing to Cambodia once or twice a year to my orphanages and work with Geraldine Cox, who's saved thousands of kids from child prostitution and begging circles. That I've got the flexibility and freedom to go and spend time with my mum and dad who aren't well now. My mum's got early onset Alzheimer's and my dad's had a stroke. I want that flexibility and that freedom. In order for me to have done that, I had to make sacrifices very young, in the business world, in the personal world, physically, mentally, emotionally. For those of you who know me a long time like Rima, you'll know that I used to be a much bigger guy, and I didn't prioritize my health because I was so committed to my business and making money. And then, I had a bit of a culture shock. Thank God I didn't have a health scare, but I had a culture shock from one of my mentors that said to me, what if you made all this money, tens of millions of dollars, but then you weren't healthy enough to enjoy it in your retirement? So then I had to shift some of those core values and understand that health was a priority and make health a priority. And that's when I did the Kokoda Trail, and I raised $300,000 for Indigenous education. I summited Mount Kinabalu in Borneo with Craig and Arnold Arnold and the boys from Core 9, used to be $1 Million Fitness. So step 1 is, what are your vision, mission, and values? Step 2 is having a strategy for your retirement, and then step 3 and understanding what kind of a lifestyle you want to live. If you're somebody who wants to send your kids to 3 kids to $40,000 a year grammar schools, that's fine, but understand that it's going to have an effect at some point. I'm saying it's, my brother sends his kids to an amazing school in Melbourne that's an elite school, and they're elite children. They're captains of the rowing team, and they're captains of the netball team, and they're academic leaders. So, they're getting a lot of benefit out of being at a school of that caliber. Yeah. But at the same time, that's 100 to 150 grand a year. That's not going into some investment strategy or long-term retirement plan. So you need to understand, yes, I want my kids to have that lifestyle. Yes, I want to drive the C63 AMG. Yes, I want to be able to fly to Europe every second year and take my 3 kids and my wife or my husband or my partner. Great. But understand, what is the Grand Master Plan? What is the 3-year North Star? And then last but not least is that my final strategy and the final mindset that I've employed is that I've always wanted to own my own home and retire comfortably. Now, you need to understand what it costs to retire. For those of you who don't know, especially people our age, and I'm sure that, you're speaking to clients that are our age, but, even I'm speaking to clients and friends that are in their 50s, leading up to their 60s. So their runway of how much time they've got in order to put money into good investment strategies and making sure they're speaking to the accountant to take advantage of, tax benefits to putting it, say, for example, into their super. Yeah. A lot of my clients, are obviously at the entourage, are self-employed. And I always ask them, when was the last time you paid yourself super? They go, I haven't done it for years. And the risk of doing that is that the superannuation is a tax haven for people, especially in your 50s, leading into your 60s. And I know a lot of people are buying property in their self-managed super fund right now. I haven't quite done that yet, but it's something I am in a position to do shortly, and I will start to look at that because I think there's a great opportunity there. So the last part is owning your own home and retiring comfortably, but understanding what retirement costs. So to give you a bit of an idea, to get into anywhere half decent now, for an aged care facility, not a nursing home, not a government program, but anywhere half decent. So it's putting either your mum or dad or at someday yourself into, let's say a 5 to 6 star rated place where they've got one worker to every 4, residents rather than, 6 or 7 like the government mandates. If you want to be able to have a half decent lifestyle in retirement, your bond to lock down one of those places now. So we're not talking 10 or 15 or 20 years time. To lock down one of those places right now, your bond will be anywhere between 300,000 up to 1.3 million. So you need to be able to have that money in some way, shape or form, whether that's equity in a home, whether it's cash, whether it's in your superannuation to lock down the bond for one of those locations. And then the government does subsidise some of the ongoing costs. But the reality is it's a thing called, it's all means tested. So for those of you who don't understand means testing, research that. So if you're a husband, or let's say Remo and I are husband, it's a new world now. Let's say we're husband, and I go into a retirement home, but Remo's got 5 or 6 properties. I am not eligible for any government funding. So to go into a premium facility might cost me $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 a year. And then I've got to have that 1.3 million sitting in a bond as well. Your family does get that back when you pass away, but God forbid, and hopefully you do, you live to 100, which people are living closer and closer to now, and our generation probably will live there.
Yeah.
We'll get to 100 and beyond. You're going to need to have good money put away. Like, the sad thing about Australia, and I'm going to give you a bit of shock therapy for those that are listening and watching this, the sad thing about Australia is you need to be either worth $0, and the government will take care of everything, but you don't have any choice where they put you, but they'll take care of everything financially. Or, in my opinion, you need about $5 million. So like Mark Boris and Yellow Brick Road talk about having $1 million each to retire, so that's $2 million, right? And owning your own home. So they're like, should have access to $2 million, that's the Yellow Brick Road way. That's now. That's if you're going to retire now. For people that are in their 30s, like the reality is everything's because of inflation and compounding growth. So the positive side of inflation is also we get the compounding growth. Like, right now you could retire with $2 million cash in the bank or your superannuation or access to $2 million somewhere and owning your own home, right? In 30 years' time, you're going to need $5 million minimum between the two of you, if not each. If not each.
Correct, yeah.
Like if you want to live half, and the problem is our generation, I'm going to give you some more shock therapy. We do not know how to go without. So like, COVID's going on. Yes, things are difficult, but you've got people that don't have a job right now. They're still going out. They're still spending money on wine and dinners, and their Uber Eats accounts are phenomenal, through the roof. And you want to talk about lending policy, the banks are looking at that stuff now, guys. Like they're going, how much money is Remo and his family spending on Uber Eats versus going to Woolies and purchasing $200 worth of groceries for the week and feeding 5 people? Like, versus they spend $600 a week on Uber Eats. Like, there's people that are just spending like mad. And I'm like, guys, do you understand this is all going to catch up with you at some stage? So you need to get smarter about, 1, where you're spending your money, and 2, most of all, where you're saving your money. And investing your money. Like the reality is, my father always drilled into me as an old European who came on a boat in 1956 from Italy, a war-torn country, and he said, being wealthy isn't about the money you make, it's about the money you save. And, I've worked with, I do a lot of volunteer work in the western suburbs of Sydney and the western suburbs of Melbourne. And there are people there that own 4, 5, 6 houses. And then I've got neighbours and friends that are in Vaucluse with me here, the most expensive real estate in Australia, who have got 150 grand in credit card debt, who've leased their car, who borrow money to pay their kids' school fees, who live year on year. They're making $500,000 a year in business or in a corporate role, but they've never got any cash.
Yeah.
Like, I come to them with great investment opportunities and they can't afford it. But then I go out to my mate's mum and dad out in Western Sydney, and I go have dinner with them, and they ask me about this new business Flave that I invested in. They saw on my social media, and they go, yeah, I could probably put 150 into that, because they're just smarter with what they do with their money. They didn't make $500,000 a year for the last 20 years. They made $100,000 a year combined, but they were smarter with how they spent it. And they went to the shops and bought food rather than spent the whole bunch on Uber Eats.
Yeah.
So, these are small things that are going to make a big difference in the long run.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. Mate, I read your book, The Morello Matrix.
Yes.
You talk about how to build your A-team.
Yes.
Now, mate, I've been in property now for the last 4 years, so not a very long time, but one of the biggest struggles that I had to figure out myself, no one actually gave me advice on this, is how do I find my A-team? How do I find the right, how do I find the right accountant, the right financial planner, and again, the information that they give me is limited to what they know.
Yeah.
And the information that I accept is limited to what I know.
Yes.
So I don't know whether that's the right person to be getting information from.
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah. Great question. So, one of the chapters in my book, The Morello Matrix, and you can Google it, guys, and download it as an ebook if you like. There's a version online. You just Google Morello Matrix and it'll come up. But one of the chapters I talk about is building your A-team. And I would actually attribute, and I should attribute, a large portion of my personal wealth creation and success as being the fact that I was very, very lucky to be surrounded by some phenomenal people very early on in my life. And obviously, as I mentioned before, I got into the property game at 18. I bought my first property with no assistance from my family, so it wasn't like, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. So some people come to me and they go, I'm looking at doing a parental guarantee for my son or daughter. If you are in a position to do that, then I think great. I think more and more we're going to see it become more and more prevalent. But I wasn't in that scenario where my father did a parental guarantee. So I did purchase my first property, but in saying that, I was quite entrepreneurial. I started my first business at 15. So the average person might be able to do it at 22 up to 25, something like that. And you should be encouraging kids that if you are funding their lifestyle to some respects whilst they're studying or starting out in the workforce, you should be encouraging them to maybe buy an investment property. So there's some great opportunities right now, I think, and it's a really good way to teach them to mature and to grow. And so when I was young, I did start to build my A-team. Now, is the A-team I had when I was 18 now versus compared to now that I'm 34 the same? No, they're not. So understand that it is an evolving group of people. Who does it include? So let's start with who it includes, and then let's talk about how we find the best ones, right? So it includes a mortgage broker, so they can access more than just one bank's products, but a plethora of products. And my mortgage broker can access literally 5,000 products across 36, 37 different lenders, right? So there's always going to be a product or a lender that will service my need at the time. Who else have I got? An accountant. I actually have had the same accountants, John and Vito from Multiply down in Melbourne, since I was 15 when I started my first business. So they have actually been with me the whole time. The next one who I've got is a great financial planner. So I've had a financial planner since I was 18. Now, has that financial planner changed? Yes, it has over the years, because I think there's a lot of financial planners, and I'm not being mean here, and this is going to be important for you to be able to sort of keep your financial planner in check. And that it has happened through regulation with what we call the FOFA changes. So if you don't know what they're about, make sure you Google them and understand them. So, all of a sudden our financial planners need to get you to re-engage on an annual basis to justify their fees, and obviously they need to do a review to justify their fees as well. For a long time they weren't doing that. For a long time, I've had a financial planner since I was 18, which certainly attributed a lot to my success, but I've changed financial planners multiple times for the reason that a lot of them before the FOFA changes got very lazy. I wouldn't hear from them for 2 or 3 years, and then I'd look and I'd go, okay, I did quite well financially, quite young, with a couple of business interests that I had. So they were, earning, 10, 15 grand a year off me for doing nothing, which is how they build their business. But I go now, I'm not saying all of them do it that way, but now they are forced to sit down with you and do a annual review, which is great as part of the changes. Number one. Number two, they have to be transparent with commissions and opportunities which there's nothing wrong with them getting that. Like, I never had an issue with my financial planners getting commissions. Like, I'm like, well, if it's a good product and you put me in it and I make money, they should get remunerated. I come from a world where I sold 1,000 properties in real estate. I always made a commission, right? So, like, I knew I worked hard, I got a great result for my client, and so I deserve to get paid for it. So I've never had an issue with that when they did the FOFA changes, but we're seeing now as a shift to what we call fee for service. So, and understanding what that means, what do I get for my fee? And how does that transparency work? The next one I've got is I've got a plethora of good builders. I do a little cheeky thing where I go and befriend and do business with old European builders, like the guys that have been in the game for, 20, 30 years, that are semi-retired. They're doing 1 or 2 projects a year. I go and get them because I can get them to walk through an existing property and tell me, okay, this is going to need, the damp core done. This is going to need, the roofing's going to need to be done in 3 years' time. That hot water service is, a couple of years away from needing to be replaced. The water pressure's good. They can come and go, these are the 2 or 3 things that you're going to need to do immediately, and then these are the half a dozen things you're going to need to do later. Yes, you can use a building inspector. So, there's plenty of great building inspecting companies. So, you might have one of those. But the reality is a lot of them are people that have gone and studied architecture or building at school and haven't necessarily $1 million a year in business or in a corporate role, but they've never got any cash. Like, I come to them with great investment opportunities and they can't afford it. But then I go out to my mate's mum and dad out in Western Sydney, and I go have dinner with them, and they ask me about this new business, Flave, that I invested in. They saw on my social media, and they go, yeah, I could probably put 150 into that, because they're just smarter with what they do with their money. They didn't make $500,000 a year for the last 20 years. They made $100,000 a year combined, but they were smarter with how they spent it. And they went to the shops and bought food rather than spent the whole bunch on Uber Eats. So, these are small things that are going to make a big difference in the long run. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Mate, I read your book, The Morello Matrix.
Yes.
You talk about how to build your A-team.
Yes.
Now, mate, I've been in property now for the last 4 years, so not a very long time, but one of the biggest struggles that I had to figure out myself, no one actually gave me advice on this, is how do I find my A-team? How do I find the right, how do I find the right accountant, the right financial planner, and again, the information that they give me is limited to what they know, and the information that I accept is limited to what I know.
Yes.
So I don't know whether that's the right person to be getting information from.
Yes. Great question. So, one of the chapters in my book, The Morello Matrix, and you can Google it, guys, and download it as an ebook if you like. There's a version online. You just Google Morello Matrix and it'll come up. But one of the chapters I talk about is building your A-team. And I would actually attribute, and I should attribute, a large portion of my personal wealth creation and success has been the fact that I was very, very lucky to be surrounded by some phenomenal people very early on in my life. And obviously, as I mentioned before, I got into the property game at 18. I bought my first property with no assistance from my family, so it wasn't like, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. So some people come to me and they go, I'm looking at doing a parental guarantee for my son or daughter. If you are in a position to do that, then I think great, I think more and more we're going to see it become more and more prevalent. But I wasn't in that scenario where my father did a parental guarantee. So, I did purchase my first property, but in saying that, I was quite entrepreneurial. I started my first business at 15. So the average person might be able to do it at 22, up to 25, something like that. And you should be encouraging kids that if you are funding their lifestyle to some respects whilst they're studying or starting out in the workforce, you should be encouraging them to maybe buy an investment property. So there's some great opportunities right now, I think, and it's a really good way to teach them to mature and to grow. And so when I was young, I did start to build my A-team. Now, is the A-team I had when I was 18 now versus compared to now that I'm 34 the same? No, they're not. So understand that it is an evolving group of people. Who does it include? So let's start with who it includes, and then let's talk about how we find the best ones, right? So it includes a mortgage broker, so they can access more than just one bank's products, but a plethora of products. And my mortgage broker can access literally 5,000 products across 36, 37 different lenders, right? So there's always going to be a product or a lender that will service my need at the time. Who else have I got? An accountant. I actually have had the same accountants, John and Vito from Multiply down in Melbourne, since I was 15 when I started my first business. So they have actually been with me the whole time. The next one who I've got is a great financial planner. So I've had a financial planner since I was 18. Now, has that financial planner changed? Yes, it has over the years, because I think there's a lot of financial planners, and I'm not being mean here, and this is going to be important for you to be able to sort of keep your financial planner in check. And that it has happened through regulation with what we call the FOFA changes. So if you don't know what they're about, make sure you Google them and understand them. So, all of a sudden our financial planners need to get you to re-engage on an annual basis to justify their fees, and obviously they need to do a review to justify their fees as well. For a long time they weren't doing that. For a long time, I've had a financial planner since I was 18, which certainly attributed a lot to my success, but I've changed financial planners multiple times for the reason that a lot of them before the FOFA changes got very lazy. I wouldn't hear from them for 2 or 3 years, and then I'd look and I'd go, okay, I did quite well financially, quite young, with a couple of business interests that I had. Yeah. So they were, earning, 10, 15 grand a year off me for doing nothing, which is how they build their business. But I go now, I'm not saying all of them do it that way, but now they are forced to sit down with you and do a annual review, which is great as part of the changes. Number one. Number two, they have to be transparent with commissions and opportunities which there's nothing wrong with them getting that. Like, I never had an issue with my financial planners getting commissions. Like, I'm like, well, if it's a good product and you put me in it and I make money, they should get remunerated. I come from a world where I sold 1,000 properties in real estate. I always made a commission, right? So, like, I knew I worked hard, I got a great result for my client, and so I deserve to get paid for it. So I've never had an issue with that when they did the FOFA changes, but we're seeing now is a shift to what we call fee for service. So, and understanding what that means, what do I get for my fee? And how does that transparency work? The next one I've got is I've got a plethora of good builders. I do a little cheeky thing where I go and befriend and do business with old European builders, like the guys that have been in the game for, 20, 30 years, that are semi-retired. They're doing 1 or 2 projects a year. I go and get them because I can get them to walk through an existing property and tell me, okay, this is going to need, the damp core done. This is going to need, the roofing's going to need to be done in 3 years' time. That hot water service is, a couple of years away from needing to be replaced. The water pressure's good. They can come and go, these are the 2 or 3 things that you're going to need to do immediately, and then these are the half a dozen things you're going to need to do later. Yeah. Yes, you can use a building inspector. So, there's plenty of great building inspecting companies. So, you might have one of those. But the reality is a lot of them are people that have gone and studied architecture or building at school and haven't necessarily gotten their hands dirty. Like, they were pouring concrete 20 minutes ago or an hour ago, right? So, like, I went over and spoke to the concreters yesterday. I spoke to the guys that were doing the form work. I speak to the builder. I'm always trying to learn. Am I a builder? No. Have I done a little bit of bricklaying? Yeah, I've done it. So at least I know what looks good, what doesn't look good, what's a quality job, what's not. So we've got the accountant, we've got the financial planner, we've got the mortgage broker or bank/lender, we've got a building inspector. We've got so I also like to use a conveyancer. The reason why I like to use conveyancers rather than lawyers, not that there's anything wrong with lawyers, guys, but conveyancer, all they do is property law all day, every day. Yeah. With a law firm, often the conveyancing department, not always, I'm just giving you the good, the bad, the ugly, often the conveyancing department is like a, sort of what I call them the cash flow poor cousin. Like they keep that department there. They don't put a lot of time, energy, and effort into it. So I use conveyancers. Someone who's really dedicated to it. So if I see something I like and I want to flick over a contract for them to have a look at, they're not going to charge me every time they look at a contract, because they know that I'm loyal to them, and when I actually do purchase or when my friends purchase, I make sure they use that conveyancer. So forging a bit of a relationship with them. And then last but not least is property experts, people like yourself, Remo, people like my brother. Like my brother's phone goes off like a hotline. Like people will often ring him, go, especially on a Saturday afternoon, I just went through and opened for inspection. I really like this property. My wife likes it. We're thinking about bidding on it next week. My brother is very good at just pulling it up. Being in the game nearly 25 years, he can just look at something and see if it's a half decent deal or not, pretty much at the click of his finger. So, and then there's lots of technology now. Now, finding the right one is a balance between who's the right fit for you personality-wise versus what part of your life that you're in as well. So, I've had planners and experts that traditionally serviced, the more sophisticated and older community. And then I've had, in the early days, I had sort of young whippersnapper guys like me that were very aggressive in their investment strategies. And I was able to do that then. I'm still able to do that now. But, let's say I got married and had kids in 12 months' time, I would probably have to be a little bit more cautious about the advice that I listen to and the advice that I take. And always, I have a concept called verify. It will come back to me, but it's like, accept it, that's the advice, but verify. Yeah. So obviously if you go to your accountant and they say to you, this is a really good opportunity, you should look at it, great. Obviously your accountant's looking at for your best interest. They're not going to disappear tomorrow. They're not fly-by-nighters. They've probably been your accountant for the last 10 years and they're going to be for the next 10 years. So if they say this looks like a great opportunity, go great. And then do your research. There's this amazing tool now that everyone has access to called Google. You can get onto Google and you can read about an area. You can read about the economy. You can read about the Reserve Bank. You can read about a financial product. These days, everything's available at your fingertips. There's so much technology to assist you in making great decisions. Yeah. You can look at socioeconomic index. You can look at economics. You can look at, demographics, geographics. You can look at all that. You can see, okay, what's been planned? Where's the freeway going to extend to? Where's the train line going to extend to? I remember when they extended the Broadmeadows line down in Melbourne to Craigieburn. Craigieburn boomed. And if I'd gotten into Craigieburn before the boom, I would have tripled my money in 5 years. Same with, the western suburbs now, Truganina down in Melbourne, Tarneet. They put all these train stations along there. Years ago, that was farmland. My mates used to go shooting on that land. I never thought, that they would have put a train line running through it, and IGA and schools and Woolies and Coles and McDonald's. The other thing I like to look at is, where is McDonald's putting, everyone forgets that McDonald's is not a restaurant business. It is a property business. Yeah. People forget that. So it's called McDonald's Property Company, and they then rent out their properties to tenants that sell hamburgers. So they just happen to sell hamburgers as part of it, right? So the reality is they've got a whole team over in America, San Benedetto, wherever their office is, right, where they are working 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to work out where to put the next McDonald's. So McDonald's, Coles, Woolies, Bunnings, these big companies are looking and go, okay, so obviously if you're making an investment into a regional or a new development area, one of the first things I ask the developer or the person representing the property is, how far away are the amenities? Where are the schools? So you can start to make those investigations yourself. Yeah. But obviously that A team is a really good sounding board for opportunities that come up, and they should also be able to help you find great opportunities as well.
Beautiful. So Andrew, thanks for your time, mate. I really appreciate it. Just as a last thing before we go, what sort of advice would you give to new investors, mum and dads looking to invest, or people that's been in the investment industry for quite some time now?
Yeah, fantastic. So I think that's a really good way to wrap it all up, Reman. I'll give sort of 3 or 4 pieces of advice, and if anyone wants to deep dive or delve into these a little bit further, wants to get some advice or anything, they can contact me a few ways. Which Remo can put in the comments for you guys. But you've got my Instagram at Andrew Morello, so feel free to add me on that. Also my Facebook, Andrew Marcello Morello, and the Marcello's Marcello, or they can email me direct, which is just Morello at the-entourage.com.au. So feel free to reach out to any of those, and Remo will pop those up on the comments. Probably, right now, if you're an investor or looking to purchase a home, or looking to get into the property market, there's a few things that I'll leave with you. Number one is embrace the uncertainty of life. The reality is that, those of the people that I've worked with, 2 or 3 years ago that were saying, I'm going to wait for the market to crash or whatever. This is it, guys. This is that moment that they said, but the reality is it hasn't really crashed. So, I don't know what they were expecting. If they were expecting there was going to be, $1 million properties going for $500,000. That's never going to happen. We have a supply-demand problem in Australia, and we're always going to have it. We have a growing population. The government will always use foreign investment and foreign migration as a leverage and as a valve in order to stimulate the economy. So no matter how bad the economy gets, we're always going to let people into this country. They're going to have money. They're going to be able to buy property. So if you are Australian born, or if you are an Australian resident and you don't own property yet, start buying property. So embrace the uncertainty of life, number one. Number two is let go of the outcome. The reality is you do not have a crystal ball. So the reality is you can't sit there and all of the experts in the world and all of the RBA reports and all of the, banking inquiries and all of the, the A team that you might build, no one's ever going to be able to say to you, this is definitely going to happen. It's bullshit if they tell you that. And you need to understand that the outcome will be the outcome, but do what you can to obviously make the better decisions to make the outcome better. Number three is control the controllables. So people sit there right now and, it's funny, and I'm going to make a little joke about it. I'm not undermining anyone, but like I did a podcast the other week for somebody and they were talking to me about, like, what's your opinion on all this stuff about COVID? Is it man-made? Is 5G a thing? Like, I'm like, you know what, guys? Or, is it some conspiracy that two families in America control a large portion of the American debt and control the, world economics? And I'm like, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and Illuminati. Mate, let me give you the hot tip. Whether that is a thing, whether they're trying to get to one currency or whether they're trying to control the world, you can't control that, right? What you can control is how much you buy that property for next door. What you can control is how much you spend on your Uber Eats account every week. What you can control is where you send your kids to school. What you can control is you buying a C63 AMG versus a quality Toyota that it's going to cost you a couple of grand a year to maintain rather than 30 grand a year to maintain. You can control those things, and the reality is that's what you should be concentrating on. So control the controllables for your investment strategy. So embrace the uncertainty of life, let go of the outcome, control the controllables. Last but not least, practice present moment awareness. Understand that we are in the now, and you need to take advantage of the now. And the only way to take advantage of the now is to look at opportunities that are happening right now. You're not going to know what's going to be available for you in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years' time. You're not going to know what the interest rates are going to be like in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years' time, or what the economy is going to be like. So right now, practice that present moment awareness and take advantage of that. Last but not least, my sign off is, more is lost with indecision than wrong decision. I made the decision to buy a property at 18 years old, which I've leveraged to purchase a second one, which I leveraged to buy a third one, which I leveraged to buy a fourth one, which I leveraged to buy a fifth one. So I did that over and over and over, and I was able to build, at 34 years old, be in a financial position to then, have the freedom to do what I want to do and spend time with the people that I love doing what I love. So, you have an opportunity to do that, but more is lost with indecision than wrong decision. Don't wait another year or 2 or 3 years, because you will regret it. Especially with Australian property, it continues to grow. It will always do well. My family's been in it since 1956. We've always done well out of it. I've been in it since I was 18. So, get out there, take advantage of the market and have a crack.
Beautiful, mate.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Remo.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks a lot.